Hey everybody, Sean here from the Black Page. Dave Weckl.
Dave, good to meet you.
We're down here at the Victoria Drum Fest 2014, and Dave just put on an incredible show. So of course, sitting there and I'm watching you play, and I've got a million questions, but I'm going to keep it to a few.
Okay.
You brought up actually something that I found interesting as we were pulling up here today. Kind of ironic, but Peter Erskine's on the same bill as Dave, and Peter was one of the guys that was paramount in getting you your start in the industry by recommending you for French Toast. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, Peter was a major influence for me growing up. He was one of my favorite players, still is one of my favorite players. Just I love the way Peter touches the drums, and just what he does is, I mean, there's a lot of him in me.
Right.
Not as good, but it's,
yeah.
it's you know. But when I was younger, when I was in high school, basically, I discovered Peter because our big band in college or in high school was very good actually. We would play some major things, and we were winning a lot of competitions, and I actually got scholarships to go to the Kenton camp in '75 in Drury, Springfield, and I was so excited because Peter was playing, it was Kenton, and I got to the camp and he had just left the band.
Oh no!
I mean, Gary Hobbs was a drummer, and Gary's great too. I love Gary, I learned a lot from him. But I was really bummed that Peter, that I just missed him, because he was just one of my favorites. So I kind of, I figured out how to get in touch with him, and of course, back in those days, there was no internet or anything. I had to get contacts and write him letters and send him cassettes, and I just, kind of bugged him when I was 17, 18 years old. And then I was in New York. I was going to school in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he was living in New York at the time. I was hanging out with Steve Connery, a great guitarist.
Yeah.
And the band that I was with, Nightsprite, which kind of became a little bit of a cult band in Westchester County in New York City. We started playing in town. We had a gig at the Breakfast Club on 7th Avenue South, and I invited Peter to come, and my guitar player, Andy Black, invited Con, who was teaching him. So they both showed up, and we had a fantastic gig. It was just really a great gig. And from that gig, Peter, thought enough of what I did to recommend me for the French Toast. So that's how.
And a really interesting question that came to mind. Your signature snare. Now we watched you play on the Yamaha Maple Hybrid today, and it sounded fantastic. But your signature snare is actually metal.
Well, let me back up a little bit. The old signature drums, and what made it signature was the 2 snare strings.
Right.
Which was my idea to do that. And the older drums, we had the maple drums at first. The original design was a 5x13, and then they did a 5x14 too, maple, and then they also eventually made a 5.5x14 aluminum, and they made a 6.5 too, which wasn't my idea, but they made it anyway.
Right.
I just never played it. But the 5.5x14 aluminum was killing. It was my favorite drum. Still one of my favorite drums that I play all the time at home for recording. And some gigs too. So they lost. Well, first of all, they stopped making all signature drums.
Right.
It was just not cost effective. It was too hard to sell everybody's drums. So, but while they were still making the drums a few years ago, they lost the factory and the supplier, I guess, of the aluminum that was a solid shell.
Right.
So I was trying to get a metal drum made, and they had another aluminum. It was a seam shell, and I didn't like it at all, so I said no to that. And then all the drums went away. Well, one of the drums they sent me when we were trying to do this metal, they sent me a chrome, a bronze, and a brass. And at the time, I was really trying to duplicate the aluminum, and none of them were close. They were different animals. So when I came to the realization that they couldn't make that drum, I pulled the brass back out, and the prototype was just ridiculous. I mean, it was different, but it was really unbelievable. So I said, let's make a brass drum, which had never been made in my signature. So I got to tell you, I mean, they surpassed the prototype, and they came and made this drum. It feels and sounds so good.
Yeah.
I just used it on both of my new records mainly. So.
We had an interesting conversation last night over dinner. Dave is very in tune with his miking techniques and the sounds of his drums through microphones, and in fact you have a setup whereby you actually control a lot of your sounds. The very beginning of your solo today was proof of that, where you were actually using the tonality of the drum with your hands. What drew you to that side? Like, not a lot of drummers I find or listen to are that specific, and in fact, a lot of things you said last night I learned in like 5 minutes. I learned so much about making drum just from you. What drew you to that side of drumming? What attracts you?
Well, I mean, I kind of have to say, I mean, I didn't really start paying too much attention to really the sound of the drums until I heard Steve Gadd.
Yeah.
And I was probably 16 when I heard him the first time, and I had never heard a drum set like that. And all the drums were really focused, and the toms were just really, low-endy, tight, controlled. So I found out later what Steve was using, which were, thick hydraulic heads at the time, or pinstripes.
Yeah, right.
But back in the early days of, he was using Yamaha drums with Evans blue hydraulic heads.
That's right.
And then he switched and he started using pinstripes. But the sound was very contained, so I figured out his sizes, 10, 12, 14, 16. And I started to try to duplicate it, figure out, and then with my friend, Jay Oliver, who was later my partner in my early records and my new record, Convergence, that's coming out. He had a studio, and he was very much into the sound. So together we would experiment. Just did, old school microphones and a mixing board, and try to figure out how to get these sounds. So it was really just a love for trying to figure out how to get the presentation of the drum sound, like Steve was doing it. Then I started to listen to a lot of different sounds. And back in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I mean, it was all about the dead drums. Everybody was putting tape all over their drums and using the thick heads.
And taking resos off.
There were no resos back then. I mean, it was just thick heads. Yeah. It was just thick heads and lots of duct tape. Yeah. Gaffer tape and toilet tissue. I still use it today, by the way, if I have to. But yeah, so we, sorry about that. I kept going smaller and smaller with the diameter of the drums, and I was using pinstripes at the time, and then I went to clear amperes for a while. But now I just use ambassadors, the drum sounds have changed over the years. I don't really go for quite the focused sound as I used to. I like to use more ambient sounds. I like to have the overheads get a lot of the kit. And it really depends on the music, but I'm getting a focused sound if I want it, even from the ambassador heads.
Yeah.
So it still works. But yeah, it was just about learning about that and then understanding. Watching a lot of really good engineers when I was coming up in New York. I worked with so many great engineers, Bernie Kirsch and Malcolm Pollock in New York, and a ton of great engineers that I just watched what they did.
Yeah.
And I would, I'd always had a kind of a studio from early on, but it really wasn't until I moved out to California that I really had in '91 that I really had my first studio. Had a really good mixing board, and it just became a passion that kind of became a secondary career.
Yeah.
Now I'd mix records for people sometimes, and certainly on my own from the late '80s on.
Yeah. So how important is it to a drummer? To even just to start identifying? You brought up a really interesting point last night about kind of the more ambient miking techniques versus a lot of the closed miking, which is not necessarily right or wrong, but just the kind of the ambient where, and you had mentioned not using the overheads above cymbals, more so kind of closer to the toms, and that treating a microphone as almost like a camera, like a photograph. How important is it, do you think, for a drummer in developing that sound? So if I'm playing the spoons, it's like, okay, that's Dave Weckl playing spoons. Is that part of it? Is understanding the drums that much that you need to know the miking techniques? And
I think it's really personal preference. I don't tell anybody, hey, you have to know how to do this stuff, because it's really another career. I mean, I spent a lot of my time reading, mixing manuals and
Okay.
blogs from
Yeah.
great engineers, and
Yeah.
Tape Op is a great online magazine that I subscribe to. And,
Okay.
I just study it. I study what guys did in the old days and understanding the different techniques, and I experiment. So to me it's really important because it's the presentation. My sound has been really manipulated and destroyed enough back in the early days by engineers that either really didn't understand how to get a drum sound, because it really, you think about it, back in the day, Buddy Rich, one mic up here, one in front of the kick. John Bonham, almost the same thing. It's and those, you're recording the drums in a room, in a space, and that's what the mic is hearing. So there wasn't any of this, It's like putting a mic on each guitar string and expecting an engineer to mix that so it sounds like one instrument. It's crazy when you think about it. If you're not a drummer, or if you don't have the drum knowledge sitting behind a mixing console, it's really difficult to get that instrument to sound like one instrument with 13 mics on it. It's almost, I don't know how anybody does it that is not a drummer. Because you've got to be able to understand what the guy's going for,
Right.
And with miking too, a lot of I've been asked to mix certain things that the miking has just been horrible. You can tell that somebody put a mic like 2 inches from the cymbal, and that's all they hear, or that they didn't record one of the overheads, or and also too, it's got to start with the drum sound. For me, it's all about when it comes to recording and mixing and all that kind of stuff, and it depends on the music. That's the first thing. It depends on the vision of how you want the drums to sound in the music that you're playing and recording. And then the miking and the way that the drums are tuned and recorded has to represent the vision. Then the mixing has to be able to present it. And so it helps when that focus is understood by the team of of musician and engineer to begin with. And some engineers are great enough to just be handed the project without being involved in the recording end of it, and they can take it and present it, so that it sounds killer. But those guys cost a lot of money, and they're really good, and they know what they're doing. And there are certain tricks that you can get into learning how to do with compression, and parallel compression, and whatever you might do with phase and all the stuff. And for me though, it's just about trying to capture the emotion of what I'm doing, so that it comes across, so that when I hear it, it's like, that's the intention. That was the intention.
Another topic you touched on today, which I thought was actually quite interesting. And we had a fastest drummer competition today, and Dave was actually quite perceptive in a couple of areas of how fast one guy was going versus another. And you brought up something really interesting to me, because I discovered the Gladstone technique by watching Back to Basics, and that just again changed my life. And then to further that, I've taken lessons with Dom, and we've studied the Moore method. But the interesting thing that for me that you brought up today was the use of multiple motions, and it's to me that's exactly it. It's coming to that, is that you don't necessarily, you're not stuck in the Gladstone or the Moeller, or it's a variance of each, and how they make your job simpler. How is that? Because I know you have developed that over the years. And how did you come to kind of that apex where you've managed to master the motions, and how that actually helps you and assists you?
Well, where I'm talking about multiple motions was specifically referring to the Moeller technique, because it's more about using the wrists for, where the stick keeps moving, but you're using multiple motions instead of one motion to do something. And it's just common sense that you can do things for a longer period of time if you figure that out. And the Moeller technique is really the drum technique to understand that motion, or something similar where you're using multiple motions to facilitate balance.
The balance of that.
For me, it really, didn't happen for me. I wasn't taught anything about multiple motions or Moeller until Jim Chapin showed it to me in the early to mid '90s. Didn't know anything about it. I knew about wrists and fingers. That's all I knew about. And although I was I maybe did it occasionally. I didn't know it.
Right.
And so Jim Chapin showed me first, and his teaching of it was very traditional, in that there was a lot of motion. And then later, maybe a few years later, I got with Freddie Gruber,
right.
and he sort of took the whole thing and just compartmentalized it into less extreme motion.
Right.
You know, so the stick stayed a little bit more level and centered on the drum, but it was still the multiple motion thing.
Right.
And that's when it really clicked for me, you know,
Yeah.
in a lot of sense.
And I mean, I guess as you progress too, and the more experience you gain, you start to understand how important these techniques do become to you to assist. And like you had said,
Well, it's a job. I mean, you got a job to do.
Yeah.
You got to build a house, so you
Yeah.
can't do it with just a handle.
right.
At some point, you're going to need, you know, a nail. At
Yeah.
some point, you're going to need a saw. You're going to need
Yeah.
tools to do
Yeah.
the job at hand. If I play a straight ahead tune, I can't do that with wrists. You know, I got to use fingers. I have to in order to pull off technically the feel and the beat. I have to do that. Same thing with, you know, playing accents for long periods of time within single stroke rolls. If I don't use the motor technique, I'm gonna run out of gas really quickly. I'm gonna hurt myself because you end up gripping the stick too tight and forcing and playing down and in. And, you know, it's just, you know, it's physical detriment.
So new album coming out.
Yeah, two actually.
Two new albums.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the first one is Convergence, which is part of the Pledge Music project that we did last year that we're way late on. I apologize if any of you have pledged. It's coming. It's endless. You know, the project was so huge that we really didn't grasp it, you know, when we were doing it. And it, you know, for one reason or another, there's just been, you know, delays and trying to get the whole project done. It's monumental. It is done. We're in artwork now, trying to get, you know, because we have play-along packages, we've got drum packages with videos, so it's 2 separate data discs. We're trying to get the colors of the CD cover right so that everybody knows what they're buying and what they get, you know. It's all done. I mean, the music's been done for months, and we've actually released the music in WAV files to the pledgers. So the actual CD is coming out. I mean, it's got to be coming out next week. Literally next week or the week after. It's got to be. I'm going to shoot myself if it doesn't. So Convergence, that's the first one, and that's kind of my fusion project with Jay Oliver.
Gotcha.
That has a lot of different stuff on it. You know, vocal tunes, a couple of jazz tunes, and all fusion signature stuff. And then the next one that is really not titled yet, but I just recorded it in January. It's kind of my dream group that I've been wanting to put together for a while, and I'm just finding the guys with the chemistry. And it's kind of more of an acoustic group, playing a totally different kit. It's an 18-inch wide open, 2-headed bass drum, 12, 14, 16 timbali, 2 rides. So it's more of a bebop thing, but not exactly. There's a lot of Latin stuff going on. Tom's playing upright bass. Tom Kennedy, Gary Meek is playing tenor and soprano, and Makoto Ozone is the piano player, B3 player. And the record is just, it's just killing. They all came to my house in January. We rehearsed for 2 days. We played 2 gigs at Catalina's in LA. And then we went in the studio for 2 days and recorded 9 songs in 2 days. Just old school, you know. Pounded them out. Record's almost mixed. It's, you know, so that'll be out in August. And I'm doing a mini tour on the East Coast and the West Coast of the States.
Okay.
Just to kick off the record.
And when's that happening?
That's the same month.
August. Same month, August.
Yeah. Yeah, those dates are going to start appearing on the website pretty soon. And then starting next spring, 2015, I'm touring this band. We're already getting a European tour going. I'd love to come to Canada. I hope we do. We don't have anything planned at the moment, but I hope we get up this way. And we'll go to Asia for sure. And, you know, so it's but it's just incredibly. The chemistry of the guys, everybody playing together, it's what you always dream of, you know. It's like finding the perfect relationship, you know, and just the harmony. It's just, you know, you have to think about it.
So stay tuned, DaveWeckl.com.
Yep, DaveWeckl.com is the best place, yeah.
Dave Weckl, folks, want to comment, like, tweet, have a question for Dave?
Facebook page too, the Dave Weckl official fan page is a good place to get info, so.
Thanks very much, Dave.
All right, Sean. Nice to meet you.
Take care.
All right, cool.
See you again.
See ya.